Welcome, everybody, to our very first Pangea Wellness webinar and podcast. If you're joining us on the podcast, I will do my best to go through and describe some of the visuals that we're going to have today. If you're watching on our webinar, feel free to follow along on the slides. There's a lot of good visuals that I want to share with you guys. But today we are going to be talking about anxiety, stress, and burnout. There is a huge amount of information to discuss here, but I'm going to try to keep it really streamlined, maybe about 30 minutes. But the main thing is I want to talk with you guys about how to break this normalized cycle. This has become an extremely normalized thing in our culture and our society these days. And as someone who has personally dealt with a lot of anxiety in the past around specific issues, but also in general, I've just talked with so many people who have gone, oh my gosh, I've had the same thing. And I've just been told that that's how it is. Like, we just have to accept it. It's just the normal way. And I'm here to tell you that it is common, but it is not normal. It's the most commonly diagnosed mental condition in the United States, if not the world, I believe as well these days. So it's affecting an insane number of people, and we need to start talking about it. So today we're going to talk about how to break that cycle. But first, I want to start with a story for you guys. So back, years ago, probably 2011, I was in Paris, France. And I was there with a group of girlfriends, and we'd gone there for about 1 week on the budget of 6 girls who really didn't have any business going to Paris and couldn't afford to go there for a week, but decided to go anyway. And on our last day there, we decided what better way to see the city than from the highest point around. So we booked ourselves a ticket to go up the Eiffel Tower at night. At 8 p.m., we packed ourselves into the rickety little elevator that takes you all the way up to the top. And as the doors were closing, the man operating the elevator jokingly said, "I hope none of you are afraid of heights." And we all kind of looked around amongst us and we were like, okay, we're all good. No one's afraid of heights here. We got to the top and the wind is whipping and just, it's, the middle of the night. I stepped out of the elevator. I looked out and I looked down at the city and suddenly got the most intense sense of vertigo that I have ever had in my entire life. Like one of those old, you guys know the Hitchcock movies where the ground pulls away and the main character is like still standing there. That's what it felt like on the top of this Eiffel Tower. And suddenly I was hyper aware of everything. My feet and my body and the wind and the distance to the ground and the fact that thing that we're standing on is, look at this picture. It looks like it's made out of crisscross matchsticks. And in a short span of time, about 2 to 3 seconds, I developed a very acute and very intense fear of heights that still, super honestly, affects me to this day. Since that day, I have become obsessed with studying stress and anxiety and where this stuff comes from, why it affects so many people. I've spent thousands of hours studying why we feel what we feel, analyzing the body's physiological response to stress, and developing tools that helped both myself in that moment and my patients since then break out of the stress, anxiety, and burnout loop that has become so normalized for our culture. Now, let's rewind here for a minute. Prior to this happening, the year before, my brother and I had done one of the sketchiest and tallest ropes courses and zip lines in South Africa. It was intense. It was really intense. 3 years before that, I had gone skydiving. And, before that exact moment in time, I had never had even as much as just sweaty palms about heights. It had never bothered me up until that moment. But I've had years to think about that day and why that day my body chose to react differently. So you see, that day in France, we woke up in our crappy hotel room where we slept 3 to a bed because, again, we were poor and really had no business being in Paris. But so sleep battery was low, right? I was crammed into this little room. Sleep battery is really low. We had walked that day up and down the artist district all day, so physical exertion was high. And although I drank plenty of water, I didn't eat as much as I thought. I don't think I ate much of anything that day. So body battery was pretty low. And third, maybe most importantly, I was there with 6 girlfriends that I'd met while traveling. We were good friends, but I was still in a new country where I didn't speak the language with people I hadn't known for very long. And I was young at the time. So subconsciously, I don't think I realized at the time how vulnerable I felt. So safety battery was relatively low. So these acute stress responses are triggered when the body feels that it doesn't have the resources to cope with the environment that it's in that moment. It's a survival response. I'm going to say that again. An acute stress response is triggered when the body feels it doesn't have the resources it needs to cope with that current environment. It doesn't have so much to do with what the scary or stressful thing is, but how equipped your body is to deal with it in that moment. That's what matters. If I had had a full night's sleep, ate normally that day, I was there with my family, or felt just generally less vulnerable, I don't know. I mean, do you guys think I would have had the same reaction on top of that Eiffel Tower? I don't think so. I think it would have been totally different. Which brings me to one of my main points. It's not the stress itself, but the perception of stress that matters when it comes to our physiology and to our health. So Harvard actually did a study on this. They tracked 30,000 adults over the span of 8 years in the United States. And they asked all these people 2 questions. They asked them, number 1, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? And number 2, do you believe that that stress is harmful for your health? And then they waited 8 years and they went back and they checked the public health records and they found out how everyone was doing. Are people alive? Are they dead? Are they sick? How are they doing? Here's what they found out. People who experienced a lot of stress in the previous year had a 43% higher risk of dying. But that was only true for the people who also believed that stress is harmful for your health. People who experienced that high amount of stress but did not view stress as harmful were actually no more likely to die or get sick. In fact, they actually had the lowest risk of dying out of everyone in the study. And this includes people who had relatively little stress. It was actually the people who were under a lot of stress but didn't think stress was harmful to them that had the best outcomes. And so I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, as I thought to myself when I read this, wait a second, we know stress is bad for you. We just know that, right? But what I've come to understand, you guys, is, I got really freaked out when I read this study because, again, I've been telling all my patients, stress is bad for your health. But it got me thinking, how can I change how I perceive stress to positively influence my health, right? How can I change how I perceive my environment so that it doesn't affect me poorly and my physical health poorly? Now, just to kind of illustrate this, I know we're not doing this workshop in person, but I want you to imagine that we are in a group. We're in a group with a lot of people. Me, Dr. Bree, I'm standing up in front of you guys talking, and I go out into the audience and I pick somebody, and it's you. And I'm going to tell you, hey, you need to come up now in front of this big group of people and stand and face all of your peers and a doctor. We're going to be watching you. And I need you to give me a 5-minute impromptu speech about all of your greatest weaknesses. So just to really make sure that the pressure is on, I'm going to be filming you and there's going to be really bright lights in your face and we're going to be all watching you. So are you guys ready? Okay, let's go. Now, obviously we're not doing this in real life, but if you're imagining this scenario, you're probably picturing the reality is that you're feeling kind of stressed out right now. Your heart's probably pounding. You might be breathing faster. Maybe you're breaking out in a little sweat. Normally we interpret these physical changes as anxiety or signs that your body isn't coping well with the current environment. But what if we consciously took a step back and we viewed these signs instead as signs that your body is energized and preparing you to meet a current challenge. And again, the people from Harvard actually did this. So the people in this Harvard study, before they went into a social stress test, an example just like what I gave you guys, they were taught to rethink their stress response as helpful. So that pounding heart rate that's going faster, hey, it's actually preparing you for action. If you're breathing faster, no problem. You're actually getting more oxygen to your brain. These are actually beneficial things. And the people in the study were like, okay. And participants who learned to view the stress response as helpful for their performance, well, they were actually less anxious, more confident. And the most fascinating thing to me was how their physical stress response actually changed, what happened on the inside of the body. Now, in a typical stress response, your heart rate goes up, right? Blood vessels constrict like this. They get smaller. And this is one of the main reasons that chronic stress is always associated with cardiovascular disease. It's really not healthy to have your blood vessels in a state like this all the time instead of this. But in this study, when participants viewed their stress response as helpful, their blood vessels stayed relaxed like this. Their heart was still pounding, but this is a much healthier cardiovascular profile. Actually, it looks a lot like what happens in the body in moments of courage rather than of fear. Now, we can't have a conversation about stress without introducing our good friend, cortisol. We've all heard of cortisol. Now, my question, I just want you to be thinking about this. My question is cortisol good or bad? Most people would hedge towards bad, again, because we're all taught to believe that stress is bad for us. People call cortisol the stress hormone, but really it's the anti-stress hormone. It's the how you deal with stress in the current moment hormone, the conquer your challenge you're currently facing hormone. Crash course in how cortisol works. Cortisol gets secreted. It's very fast acting and it kicks your body into a fight or flight mode. So the heart rate goes up, right? Breathing rate goes up, blood vessels change. Historically, high levels of cortisol were reserved for very life or death issues like escaping from a saber-toothed tiger back in caveman days. But flash forward to today, and we pump cortisol out at such high levels steadily throughout our day, every single day, that it's actually leading towards more health issues than almost anything else right now. Stress is probably the number one factor when it comes towards our chronic health conditions that we're facing. So here are some of the actions that have been shown to elicit an acute cortisol spike. There's poor sleep, eating refined sugar or grains, your alarm clock going off first thing in the morning. You guys know those little pop-up notifications you get on your cell phone? There's actually an acute cortisol spike that happens when you get those. There's also an acute dopamine spike, depending on what kind of notification it is and how the design is, but something to be aware of there. That's why those cell phone notifications are so addicting. Checking your email will spike your cortisol. Running late, I think we all can resonate with that one, right? Driving, especially in traffic. Mild dehydration, financial distress, and arguments, bad relationships. I mean, these are just starting point examples. But, what we know now is that when that hangs out for too long in the body, it starts to create all of these downstream effects. So melatonin, which is our sleep hormone, starts going down. Blood pressure starts going up. Cortisol starts going up. Clotting factors, so the thickness of your blood basically goes up. Insulin sensitivity goes down, which means you're not going to regulate your blood sugar as well. Inflammation goes up. Connective tissues are weaker. It actually structurally affects the soft tissues in your body. And your immune system gets tanked. So without this shift in perspective, when chronically high, we're dealing with this list among many other things. And, here's the thing. There's not a single thing in your body that's happening on accident without a purpose. There's just nothing. Everything is happening for a reason. We need cortisol. You better believe that, if your kid runs out into the middle of the street and you need to react, you don't want to be coming from a polar opposite side of the spectrum, way down in rest and digest mode. Like you need to be kind of ready to act and have quick burning fuel to burn. But again, excessively high cortisol throws off your other hormones. It can actually even cause things like anxiety, insomnia, chronic fatigue. It'll ruin your libido and your sex drive, lowers our quality of life, it promotes insulin resistance, blah, blah, blah. This list goes on and on. It's a mess. But stress is just part of life, right? Not the stress that we're currently dealing with these days. So I want you guys to imagine, for example, we're going to talk about anxiety. Pretend for a moment that you are a giraffe. Okay. You live out on the grasslands in the African savanna. You have a neck that's 7 feet long. Every now and then, you spot a group of humans that's driving around in the savannah on a safari that are taking pictures of you. And as you go living your best giraffe life, every decision that you make provides an immediate benefit to your life. So when you're hungry, you walk over and you kind of munch on a tree and you get a reward immediately. When a storm rolls across the savannah and you see it coming, you take shelter under a bush and you're safe. On any given day, most of your choices as a giraffe, like what to eat, where to sleep, how to get away from a predator, they have an immediate effect on your life. You're constantly focused on the precise present moment. You live in what scientists call an immediate return environment because your actions instantly deliver clear and immediate outcomes. But let's flip the script here for a second. Now we're going to be the human. Now you're that human in that safari truck driving around. Unlike the giraffe, we humans live in what researchers called a delayed return environment. Most of the choices that you make today will not affect you immediately or not benefit you immediately even. If you do a good job at work, you'll get a paycheck, but not for usually a few weeks. If you save money now, you'll have enough for retirement, but not for years for a lot of people. So this is true of our problems as well. When a giraffe is worried about an immediate problem like avoiding lions or seeking shelter, most of the problems humans worry about are problems of the future. For example, while bouncing around in your savannah in your Jeep, you might look up and you might think, this safari has been a lot of fun. It'd be really cool to work as a park ranger and see giraffes every day. Speaking of work, is it time for a career change? Should I just throw everything to the wind? Am I really doing the work I was meant to do? Should I change jobs? And we start going down this rabbit hole of thinking. And, because as humans, we have this beautifully designed prefrontal cortex that lets us overthink everything. But we also live in this delayed return environment, and that tends to lead towards chronic stress and anxiety for humans. Why? Because your brain wasn't designed to solve the problems of a delayed return environment. It's like somebody saying, ready, set, go. And that delay is where the anxiety lives. And that's the state that we're kind of all stuck in these days because of the way that our society has been built. What it really all comes down to is the development of the human neurology and the human brain. We didn't evolve to function in that delayed return environment. This is new to humans just in the last 500 years. If you guys are watching on our webinar, take a look at this picture. All of those dots there, those are all representing 100 years. And the top left highlighted dots, just 5 of those, illustrates the last 500 years. Now, in perspective, 200,000 years ago, that's when the modern human brain was formed. That entire span of time between 200,000 years ago and just the last 500 years, just in the last 500 years, we've started to function within more of a delayed return environment. Before then, we were all in the same situation as the giraffe. We were all getting immediate returns. And so now in just the last 500 years, we've started to have different demand on us neurologically and from a cultural standpoint than we are biologically built to have to deal with. And okay, are you guys ready for some scary stats? Just in the last 5 years, anxiety disorders are now the most common mental illness in the entire United States. They affect over 40 million adults, or over 19% of the population. That's wild. Generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, affects 6.8 million adults. Young people are more likely to experience symptoms of anxiety than older adults. In the 18 to 24-year-old age group, 50% of that age group reported depressive disorder or anxiety symptoms. That's really scary. 50% of people between 18 and 24, half of the people between 18 and 24 had depressive disorder or anxiety symptoms. During COVID, during the last just 4 years, we saw a shocking uptick of anxiety by 25% worldwide. So, what should we do? Step one, I suggest that we start to recognize how much stress we're really under. The problem is we don't always know. I grew up in the Bay Area in California, and it's an environment that I'm very familiar with. And one of my practices that I was in before I came to Pangea was in the central part of the Bay Area. A lot of my patients were very high executive Bay Area women. And so these women were working at least 40 to 60, mostly 60 hours a week, sometimes taking care of families, working out, eating healthy, like an insane amount of demands on these women. And I had on one hand a huge amount of admiration for them because I would ask them like, hey, Betty, how stressed are you? And they'd be like, I'm good. I got this. And what I came to realize is it was coming from a place of self-confidence and a knowledge that, I can't recognize how much stress I'm under because I'm going to have to do all these things anyway. So why does it benefit me to dwell in the fact that I'm so stressed? So when I would ask these people, how stressed are you? They'd be like, I'm fine. But then I started to change what I was asking them. And I started to ask, okay, but how much load are you under? And then we started getting different responses. And people were going, oh my gosh, a lot. I'm under a lot of load, right? And this term that's starting to become, luckily, more popular in the holistic healthcare space is allostatic load. Allostatic load is the cumulative physiological, psychological, and emotional effect of chronic stress on the nervous system. I'll say that again for my podcast listeners. Cumulative, so builds up over time. Physiological, meaning physical in your body. Psychological, meaning mental and what's going on in your brain, and emotional effect of chronic stress on the nervous system. Luckily, this is starting to get more attention because it's affecting everybody, and to some extent, and some people significantly more than others. Everyone who's watching the webinar, I want you to screenshot this slide, and people on the podcast, I'll do my best to describe it, but this is a flow chart basically of how stressors come into the neurology, what it does in the body, and then what gets spit out on the other side. So if you're watching this on the webinar, again, please take a screenshot of this and save it somewhere. So let's break this down. There are different types of stressors that come into the body. They can be broken down into basically 3 types. There's the environmental stressors. Maybe this is your home, economic state, your isolation. And again, I think this chart was created during COVID. Work, physiological stressors, could be sleep, could be chronic pain, could be diet. This is a couple of blends here. You hear us talk at Pangea a lot about physical stress, mental stress, and chemical stress. And this kind of blends into these categories. And then the third type here is trauma or major life events. Maybe this is death, maybe this is divorce, job loss, really severe stuff. All of these different types of stress come into the brain, and then there's the perceived stress. Remember me standing on top of the Eiffel Tower, that recipe of the type of day that I've had so far, the environment that I was in created a perceived stress because of the state that I was in. Individual differences in genes, in development, in experience, those are going to determine what happens with that perceived stress, and it creates a behavioral response. It's either going to be adaptive, meaning you're going to adapt to it in a positive way. It's going to be maladaptive, or you're going to react to it in a negative way. Either way, there's going to be a physiological response to that stress. What the nervous system does with this stress is it takes that stress and it tries to shift and adapt to it and it will actually create subluxation in your body, in your spine. Bones will misalign to try to adapt to that kind of stress, no matter where it's coming from, not just the physical stuff, but environmental, physical, mental, emotional, chemical stresses, all of it has a potential to cause subluxation. And if that builds up enough in your system, we start getting this concept of allostatic load, which is the cumulative buildup of all those stressors over time due to chronic stress. Now, what gets spit out the other side? Now we have physiological load, psychological load, and emotional load. This means when you've been subluxated or when you've been under chronic stress for a long period of time, these types of loads are the effects that you're going to start to see in the body. Hypertension, high blood pressure, immune dysfunction, metabolic dysregulation. This is under the physiological side. Psychological load is mood disorders, cognitive decline, substance abuse, sleep disorders. On the emotional side, now we get the fear, the worry, the anxiety, emotional reactivity, decreased resilience, emotional dysregulation. This list goes on and on. But really what I want to focus on with you guys is that there's the breakdown of systems over time if we don't do anything about it. And we have to start talking about solutions. We have to start talking about what changes things. If I could trace the anatomy of the human body all the way back to its source, we have to ask ourselves what controls everything. And the answer is the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. Those control everything, primarily the brain. And the brain sends messages to the body through the spinal cord, out through the nerve highway to either an organ, a cell, a muscle, a tissue. It controls every single thing in your entire body. So when it comes to helping your nerve system handle and perceive stress differently, this is the place that we should be focusing, is on the central nervous system. Now, the first tool that I want to give you guys is the tool of specific rest. For my patients at Pangea, it's likely that at some point you've probably gotten a handout like this, but if you haven't, next time you come in to get adjusted, ask me and I will give you one of these handouts. It describes the 8 different types of rest. Basically, think about it like this. There's 8 different batteries in your body. And by the time you get to the end of your day, each one of those batteries is drained to a certain extent. There's your physical battery, your mental battery, your social battery, creative, sensory, spiritual, emotional, and metabolic. So by the time you get to the end of your day, all of those, none of them are going to be at 100% because all of them have done some kind of exertion. But the question you need to ask yourself is, which one of my batteries is drained the most? And where am I putting the most work in? What type of battery is working the hardest? That way, when it comes to resting, we can be a lot more specific with our rest. The challenge that a lot of people have is they'll get to the end of their day and they'll be exhausted and they'll sit down on the couch and they'll start watching Netflix, which, okay, is that physical rest? Yes. But if physical battery is actually still pretty high, but sensory and, mental battery are really low, is sitting on the couch watching Netflix actually benefiting you, or is it draining that battery more? It's actually harming you more than it's helping, which is why when you've been on the couch for a super long time and you get up and you're like, man, I feel like a zombie, I'm so tired. That's why, because it's actually draining a different battery in your nerve system, just not the physical one. So my suggestion is, again, use this visual if you're watching the webinar, screenshot it, and the subtext there under each one describes different tools that you could potentially use to recharge each specific battery. So for example, if you find yourself at the end of your day, your creative battery is the lowest, then your tool should not be physical rest. It needs to be creative rest. For example, listening to music, reading something inspiring, going for a nature walk, letting go of the pressure to create. I think a lot of people feel this. Sensory battery, do some grounding exercises, right? Turn off your devices, turn off the lights and sounds, keep them low. Do some aromatherapy, time away from social media or media in general. Just have to make this more specific. Tool number 2, neural programming. Okay. Wherever you are right now, whether you're watching or just listening on the podcast, assuming you're not driving, I want you to sit really straight in your chair or your couch or wherever. Palms are going to go up on your lap, and then you're going to put one hand right out in front of you with your thumb up, like you're giving someone a thumbs up, but arm is straight. Okay, we're going to do some neural reprogramming here. With the eyes focused on that thumbnail, you're going to say in your head or out loud 5 things that you see in the periphery of your vision. Your eyes are staying trained right on that thumbnail, so you're only using your peripheral vision for this. You're going to say 5 things that you can see. So, for example, with where I'm at right now, I can see my computer monitor, I can see out my window, there's some trees, I can see my desk, blah, blah, blah. 5 things, okay? Then we're going to go to 5 things that I can hear. So right now I'm in a pretty quiet environment, so this is actually challenging. I hear the sound of my own voice echoing a little in the room. I hear an airplane outside. Just kind of feel around, see if you can find 5 things. And then 5 things that I can feel, and these have to be external to the body, not if you're in the middle of a panic moment, not I feel my heart beating really fast. External to the body, meaning I feel the chair underneath my seat, I feel my feet on the floor, I feel the air circulating around the room. Okay, 2 more things, get to 5. Then we're going to start back over at the top and go 4 things that we can see, 4 things that we can hear, 4 things that we can feel. This is a grounding exercise. What it's doing is it's reprogramming the brain to send electricity and send awareness from the central part of the brain, which is the amygdala, which primarily controls our panic and our stress when we start getting in that stress spiral. It sends electricity instead to the prefrontal cortex, which deals with cognitive thought and cortical thinking and really complex analysis and really focusing on what's right in front of you in this moment. So if you go through it in that way of 5 things I can see, hear, feel, then 4 things, and then we're going to walk our way down to 3 things, 2 things, 1 thing. By the time you get to 2 or 3 even, probably you're going to be feeling a lot more calm in your body, and you're going to have broken that cycle of stress hormones that are just getting released from the center part of the brain because all the activity now is coming to the prefrontal cortex. This is called a grounding exercise, but it's a way to reprogram the neurology to say, hey, let go of this here, we're going to focus here in the front of the brain. I highly suggest everyone doing this on a regular routine basis, not just when you're feeling stressed or anxious, because then when you do find yourself in a stressful or anxious situation, you can implement it and it's just that much easier to kick into that mode. Okay, tool number 3. We are going to use our breath. Everybody knows, no one is going to be surprised by this, that breath work is an amazing tool for stress. But I think there's a little tiny piece of this that gets missed. So when we breathe in, you're going to breathe in through your nose and then exhale through your mouth. So when you're doing this, maybe wherever you're listening to this right now, do your normal breath. Don't try to take any deeper breath than normal. Do your normal breath, but just count the seconds that it takes for you to breathe in naturally. So I'm going to do this right now with you guys. Okay, so my natural inhale was about 3 to 4 seconds. What we want to do is make our exhale just 1 second longer than our inhale. What that does is it kicks into gear one of the most powerful detox systems of the body, which is your breath. And on the exhale, you actually exhale a lot of things that have just gotten metabolized in the body. Metabolic waste will come out on your exhale, on your breath. It also switches you from a state of fight or flight into a state of rest and digest. It completely changes the neurology. So just a 1 second longer exhale than your inhale. It's a funny story. I actually taught this workshop once at a office with a group of people, and a girl sitting in the front row happened to be wearing an Apple Watch, and it was monitoring her heart rate variability, which, as you guys know, is a big indicator of stress and where you're at on the fight or flight or rest and digest spectrum. And I made them all close their eyes and just start breathing like this, and I timed them for a minute. I said, just breathe like that for a minute. And without even asking her, she raised her hand at the end and was like, Dr. Bree, my heart rate variability just changed like 5 or 6 points in a minute of breathing like this. She's like, that is wild. My pulse is lower. Like, I wasn't stressed out sitting here to begin with, but now all of a sudden, my body knows what to do. So again, highly recommend using this tool regularly. Tool number 4, this is going to sound interesting, but kind of similar to our neural reprogramming tool, is to measure something. So going back to our giraffe and human example, you can't know for certain how much money you're going to have in retirement, probably like today, but you can remove some of that uncertainty from the situation by measuring how much you save each month. So again, another example, you can't be sure that you're going to get a job after graduation, but you can track how often you reach out to other companies about internships, making it less of a delayed return environment and more of an immediate return environment. See what you can do to measure and know at least with confidence that you're doing the right things to be on the right track. You may not be all the way at the finish line. You may not be at the point where you've already met your goals, within a short period of time, but knowing that each step along the way is getting you there, that takes a huge amount of anxiety out of the equation. Measurement, is not going to magically solve all of our problems, but it helps clarify the situation and it pulls you out of that black box of worry and uncertainty, and it helps you get a grip on what's actually happening. One of the most important distinctions between an immediate return environment and a delayed return environment is rapid feedback. Animals are constantly getting feedback about the things that cause them stress. So as a result, they actually know whether or not they should feel stress. But without measurement, we aren't getting any feedback. So find a way to measure something. The last thing is tool number 5, the chiropractic adjustment. The chiropractic adjustment is the only thing that directly removes subluxation from the nervous system. And as we've discussed, anytime you experience stress, anytime, your body will adapt to it by shifting bones out of place and causing a misalignment. Sometimes it's going to be to a higher degree than normal. Sometimes you're going to feel it. Sometimes you're not. But every single time that you experience some kind of stress, the way that you stay alive is through adaptation. And your body will adapt to that stress with subluxation. Everyone knows that chiropractic is for things like neck pain and back pain, but most people have no idea what we're really focused on most is the nervous system. My job is to help flip the light switches back on. When your nerves get pinched, when the electricity gets dampened, the chiropractor's job is to help restore proper nerve flow to the body. If we understand how much constant regular stress all of us are under, then continual rhythmic or regular chiropractic care just makes sense. If you don't understand how much stress you're under on a regular routine basis, then it doesn't make sense. All right, last couple things here, and then we're going to wrap up. If I had to pick the 5 most dangerous words in healthcare, it would be, maybe it will go away. We like to just ignore our way out of recognizing our problems. And the only way forward is through. We cannot expect to dig ourselves out of the stress mess that we're in by avoiding stress. In most of your lines of work, this is just not an option. We have to focus on creating resilience. We have to focus on changing the perception of stress for it to actually become a tool that creates growth and creates pressure towards a stronger state. Remember, your body is really smart, it's intelligent, and it's remarkably resilient given the right support. Every single day, we have the opportunity and privilege at Pangea to help lives breathe easier in our community. I personally believe that every living thing deserves to experience this state of a subluxation free life. So, my prompt and my ask of you guys, just as we wrap up here, is that if something here resonated with you, number one, please share this webinar or this podcast with whomever you like. Doesn't just have to be our Central Oregon community. Share the link around. Number two, if you are not currently getting your spine and nervous system checked, please consider giving us a call at Pangea. And I would love to talk with you, or one of the other doctors I know would love to get on a call with you. Remember, pain is one indicator that there's something wrong going on in the nervous system, but is by far and away not the only indicator. And it's actually not even the strongest indicator that there's something off. So if there's something else off, or you just feel like you're not handling stress as well as you could, you're missing out on that last tool, which is the chiropractic adjustment. I would love to help more of you guys with this. We have 100,000 people who live in Bend now, and I think our practice sees maybe less than 1% of those people. And although we're really blessed, we get to see so many people in our practice as we currently are, there's still so many people out there, and not everybody is getting the support that they need. So again, if you or yourself or someone else that you know and love needs support and needs help clearing their nervous system, regulating their nervous system, please give us a chance to chat with them on the phone and see how we can help. All right, I hope that everyone got some good takeaways there. And technologically, I hope that this worked, because this was our first podcast / webinar. We're kind of recording both at the same time. But, like, subscribe and all that to our YouTube channel, and follow along on our Pangea podcast for more. We are going to be releasing a podcast episode ideally every couple of weeks. So stay tuned for more in the future. But until then, this is Dr. Bree. I have loved chatting with you guys today, and hope you got something good out of that. And I will talk to you all soon.